smile like you've been told a secret. Now you're telling lies, 'cause you have sworn to keep it. But no one keeps a secret. No one keeps a secret. Why, when we do our darkest deeds, do we tell? They burn and our brains become a living hell.
2 weeks, 1,059 pages. Today's shirt is Basil of Baker Street from Disney's The Great Mouse Detective, because he is simply nothing but a cartoon version of Sherlock Holmes. Hello, and welcome to the Flores Garden. Today's special guest is little Basil of Baker Street. And the review is my complete novels and stories, volume 1 of Sherlock Holmes. Oh, Basil doesn't want to stay. Okay. At first, I was not going to do a review on Sherlock Holmes because of how big this is, and it's not even the complete version. It's only about half of his stories. In this volume, there is A Study in Scarlet, the very first Sherlock Holmes book, The Sign of Four, which is the second one, and then The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which has multiple different stories, all short, about 20 pages long each. Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, again, about 20 pages per story. And The Return of Sherlock Holmes, again, about 20 pages per story. Now, the reason I did not want to do a review on Sherlock Holmes was because I am extremely biased. I love Sherlock Holmes. I love how smart he is, well, that's pretty much it. I just love how smart he is. I love smart people in general. If you put all of my fictional crushes in a line, I would automatically go straight for Sherlock Holmes because I am attracted to intelligence, and Sherlock Holmes pretty much takes the cake on that. And as it was stated in this book over and over again, Sherlock Holmes had said, do not allow judgment to be biased on pretty much anything. So I would say read the book because it's amazing, but that's just me because I love Sherlock Holmes. I love his intelligence. I think he's great. He's amazing, but that's just my opinion. Do not take my word on it if you are not interested in this kind of thing. In A Study in Scarlet, Sherlock admits that he is very well versed in the sciences, mainly chemistry and anatomy, both subjects which I failed in school. And he knows some botany and very little politics. And he's not, he doesn't find any appeal to any literature. So it says in the first book, but as the series progresses, you see that he ends up broadening his views and learns more because whatever he learns, whether it's through the newspaper or reading textbooks or literature, it helps him solve his cases. Now, these stories are written through John Watson's point of view, and if you don't know who that is, John Watson is his sidekick, really. He's a doctor. He doesn't really talk much about his own stuff. All of his stories are surrounded around Sherlock. And at first, all of the stories just kind of show Sherlock where he's just sitting there. People come up to him, give him their problems, and he sits there for a second, and he solves the mystery, like, immediately. And afterwards, he explains to Watson how his mind goes through all of the clues and suspects and figures out everything right away. So we don't really see much any adventure in the beginning stories. It's not until later that Sherlock decides he's gonna go out and solve these mysteries, like, on his own pretty much, with a little bit of help from Scotland Yard, but to be honest, they are not much help other than giving him vital information that they somehow missed. And a majority of the time, Sherlock calls them idiots. He's a bit condescending when it comes to other people's intelligence, but I found that a little funny. And whereas Sherlock is incredibly smart, he is not the biggest genius in the world. He even admits that his older brother, Mycroft Holmes, who shows up in a couple of stories, is far smarter than Sherlock. But Mycroft is incredibly lazy, so he doesn't go out and solve mysteries like Sherlock does. So being a fan of Sherlock Holmes, I was really excited to see more of other characters besides Sherlock. I was very intrigued by the Irene Adler that I kept seeing in the movies and other short stories, but unfortunately, Irene Adler only shows up in one story throughout the entire original Sherlock Holmes series by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And just like it says in all of the other stories, the non-canonical versions, she is beautiful, she is cunning, she is the only woman to outsmart Sherlock Holmes. But she only shows up in one story, A Scandal in Bohemia. Not only that, Sherlock Holmes has stated that he does not feel romantic love. It's not logical. He is very logical and not emotional at all. So when it comes to Irene Adler, he doesn't actually love her. He finds her frustrating, but he also admires her for being someone that can outsmart him. Another person I was super excited to see more of, because of all of the other non-canonical stories, was Professor Moriarty. Except just like Irene Adler, Professor Moriarty only shows up in one story. Now, Moriarty is described as the Napoleon of crime. He conducts his crimes kind of behind the scenes. In the book, he was described kind of like a spider, not physically. He's the person that's always in the background manipulating other people to do his work and committing crimes. He's a genius in mathematics, which I honestly did not know. I thought he was just an evil version of Sherlock Holmes. And he always happens to be one step ahead of Sherlock, which is why so many people had called him the greatest villain for Sherlock to ever come against. Now, the story that Moriarty shows up in is called The Final Problem. Originally, that was supposed to be the end of Sherlock Holmes. Moriarty and Sherlock were fighting on the edge of a cliff. They both fall, they die, and that was supposed to be the end. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle did not want to write any more Sherlock Holmes books. Except the fans of his stories wanted more stories. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had to find a way to bring Sherlock back in a logical way to show that he wasn't actually dead. Moriarty, on the other hand, is just dead. Now, as much as I love Sherlock Holmes, I did have a teeny tiny little problem while reading this. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was constantly saying, well, pretty much Sherlock was saying, that you always have to pay attention to the evidence, make sure everything lines up, everything is continuity correct. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I want to go back in time, speak to you in person, because, sir, you need to explain your crimes to me, sir. Twice, I have found continuity errors. The first time was in a study in Scarlet, it says that Watson had gotten a bullet in his arm. And then in the second book, it was stated that Watson had the bullet in his leg. So, bad. Really bad. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, you need to go back and fix that. The second continuity error I found was involving Professor Moriarty. When he's first mentioned, it was mentioned through Moriarty's brother, James Moriarty. Professor Moriarty's first name was never mentioned at all. And then in the next story, where Sherlock Holmes logically, comes back to life, they said that Professor Moriarty's name was James. So who is really James? Is it Professor Moriarty or his brother? And me overthinking pretty much everything, maybe Professor Moriarty never had a brother. Maybe he's back alive, just like Sherlock, and he's performing more crimes, which of course is not canonically true. But that's just me overthinking things like I always do. Out of all of the stories that I read in this one, my absolute favorite was The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton. That story had me laughing so hard, I actually had to stop reading for a second to calm down. And at the time I was visiting my parents, so my mom was watching me laugh until I was able to speak again, and I explained the story to her. Charles Augustus Milverton is a blackmailer. He will find any discrete information on anybody, everybody, upper class, royals, middle class, lower class, it doesn't matter who you are. Any dark secret you have, he will find and use against you. The only way to make sure that that information is never brought out in public is to pay him. And if you are unable to afford his prices, which honestly were ridiculously expensive, he would blast your secrets to all of society to the point where you had to go into hiding or suffered the consequences of whatever your secret was. Sherlock detested Milverton. He disgusted Sherlock. Sherlock hated him more than he hated Moriarty, because he was just a disgusting person overall. Even I will admit that what he did was so wrong. And the problem was that Milverton could not really be seen as a criminal. Yes, blackmailing is illegal, but there was no proof on how he got that information, and because he was sneaky enough to hide his sources as well as any documents he had, Milverton could not get caught. So he wasn't arrested, but everybody knew who he was because of all the information he had on people. So a woman had hired Sherlock to get any documents of her personal secrets back from Milverton, and Sherlock tried his best to get the documents from Milverton without having to pay all of that money, which pretty much nobody had unless you were royalty. And even then, I'm pretty sure the royals would have gone completely bankrupt by paying those prices. And Milverton absolutely refused. So Sherlock decided that he was going to be a small-time criminal for the time being and break into Milverton's house to steal those documents. And Watson refused to be left behind. He went along with Sherlock, so he got a first-hand account of the entire adventure instead of Sherlock just explaining what happened afterwards, which was fun. And what happens next is what had me cackling hysterically, like a mad woman. Sherlock and Watson broke into the house wearing masks over their faces, so of course they would not be recognized should they get caught. They broke into Milverton's study and were very close to finding the information they needed when Milverton showed up. So then Sherlock and Watson hid behind a curtain next to the giant window, and they were watching everything that had happened afterwards. A woman had gone to see Milverton, and she was begging him, not begging him, she was wearing a disguise as well, and she told him, "You ruined my life with your blackmail." And Milverton is just sitting there smirking at her, being really condescending, being a total jerk, and said that it was her problem, not his, and that there was nothing that she could do to take back what he had done. And the woman agreed, like, there is nothing I could do to take back my life, but I can stop you from hurting other people. So this woman pulls a gun out of her dress, shoots Milverton. He's dead. She ends up taking her documents and runs. And the entire time, Sherlock and Watson are still behind the curtain. They saw the entire thing. They are completely shocked. And Watson is saying, "Sherlock, we need to go before we get caught because people heard that gunshot." And Sherlock manages to find all of the blackmail documents that Milverton had and burn them in the fireplace. So then they escaped. And unfortunately, they were seen by the servants of Milverton's house. But thanks to their masks, nobody recognized them. But they did get a good description on their height and their build, what they were wearing, that kind of thing. So the next morning, it was all over the newspapers that Milverton had been killed by a mysterious person. And Inspector Lestrade from Scotland Yard came over to Sherlock, asking him for help in solving the Milverton case. And Lestrade had given Sherlock the descriptions that the witnesses had of course, Sherlock and Watson. But they didn't know that it was Sherlock and Watson because of their masks. So Watson is like silently panicking, like, "Oh crap, we're gonna go to jail." Because somebody else had killed Milverton and we were the ones that got caught. But Sherlock is sitting there, completely calm, and said, "Milverton was a jerk and deserved to die. So I will not be helping you solve this murder. I will not help you find the people that were seen at his house." And that's when I just sat there laughing hysterically. And that was the end of the story. So that is all I have to say on Volume 1 of Sherlock Holmes. Next, I will be reading The Hounds of the Baskervilles before moving on to Volume 2, because I was not able to find all of the stories in Volume 2, hence why Baskervilles is going to be separate. But hope you enjoyed this. Bye!
Can you keep it? Swear this one you'll save. Better lock it in your pocket. Take it this one to the grave. If I show you, then no, you won't tell what I said. 'Cause two can keep a secret if one of them is dead. Yes, two can keep a secret if one of them is dead. Yes, two can